We want to dig deeper into today's announcement, and we have with us to help us do that two analysts that Bloomberg ranks among the most accurate for Apple and Verizon. Shaw Wu is a senior research analyst at Kaufman Bros who follows hardware tech companies. He has a buy on Apple on a $395 price target. He was at the announcement today. David Burks is a senior analyst at Hilliard Lyons, covering Verizon as well as AT&T, and has a buy rating on both of the stocks. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us. And Shaw,
He wasn't there.
You weren't there?
Yeah, they only allowed the Verizon analysts at the event. Yeah, so.
It was here in New York, so I figured you went there, and you said it was only 20 minutes, so they didn't really say a lot.
Yeah.
Interesting, though, that they won't be able to do multitasking. I mean, that's the whole point of the iPhone 4 over the 3GS, right? Why will Verizon not be able to handle this feature?
Well, you could still multitask, within the apps. It's just when you're doing voice and data at the same time, you can't do that, and it hasn't really, slowed down Android sales at all, to be frank.
But I can't be talking to Julie on the phone about where we should go for dinner and then call up, restaurant review on the internet while I'm talking to her on the phone.
Yeah, it's definitely. It'll definitely be more difficult. AT&T does have that advantage.
David, we also hear that AT&T is going to be a better company for roaming in Europe or overseas. I mean, it seems like a couple of drawbacks Verizon starts out with here.
That's certainly a potential issue there, and I'm sure AT&T will gladly try to point out any differences that they feel play into their favor.
Are there any differences that play into Verizon's favor other than the perceived better network?
Well, that's clearly the strongest. There's been a perception in recent years that they enjoy the better network, and we'll see how much switching that takes place from AT&T to Verizon for the iPhone. I would point out, however, that about 75% of AT&T's customers are under contract through 2012, and a number are on family plans as well. Yes, we expect significant churning, but perhaps I don't believe it will prove to be a worst-case scenario for AT&T.
Let's talk about it from the side of the network operators for a second, Shaw. Is AT&T going to lose a heck of a lot of business because of this, or do you see kind of a flip-flop? Because Verizon's been really boosting the Google Android phones. They're going to obviously start selling the iPhone. AT&T is putting emphasis on Google products as they lose, the iPhone exclusivity.
Yeah, so I think there's definitely going to be some potential for users switching over from AT&T to Verizon. And I don't think it's just perception of quality. If you look at some of the surveys out there, consumer reports, et cetera, where the Verizon network was actually rated #1, for in terms of reliability.
Although they haven't had the flood of iPhone users to clog up their network yet.
That's true. So this will be a test, of the Verizon network. Now, on the other side, I think the reason why Verizon is interested for the iPhone is if you look at the Android data and the sub ads for Verizon, they've actually been losing share, to AT&T over the last 2 quarters. So it's gotten to a point where it makes a lot of sense for Verizon to bring an iPhone to regain share.
If Tom Keene were here, he would call a jargon alert. You said sub ads, and what you mean is that subscriber additions. So they've been losing basically people coming to buy Google Android phones from them because they've been going to AT&T. AT&T's been boosting their Android marketing campaign.
Yeah, I think part of it could be that, but if you look at since the iPhone 4 was released, there's been a very sharp acceleration in terms of the units of iPhone 4. It's part of it is global, but a big part of that is also AT&T.
David, I want to bring you back into this and ask you specifically about the telecom stocks and what we're seeing today. Everybody at the office keeps coming up to me and saying, why is Verizon down on the day that it's releasing this? And my answer to them has been, well, this is a stock that's rallied about 40% off the lows. Is it anything more than that that's a potential downside of all of this?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head right there. The stock is up 40% since last July, far outperforming the market and AT&T as well. So I think it may be a classic case of the stock rising on an anticipation of event and then selling off on the reality of the event. Also, and then I might add to that, I think because of the subsidizing that will go on the iPhone, that Verizon's earnings could come in less than expected. Obviously, margins should be negatively impacted, so there could be some potential downside to the current consensus Verizon earnings estimate of $2.25 per share.
Now, what exactly do you think is going to happen in the margins? What's your forecast, and how does that compare to what we've seen at AT&T? Is Verizon going to get more compressed somehow, or are they just going to be comparable?
Well, we think earnings will certainly be negatively impacted in the first two quarters of 2011, and then we think they will rebound as the year goes on. And we saw a similar instance with AT&T. Once they began selling the iPhone, the margins were squeezed, but eventually started to recover. Verizon enjoys the highest margins in the industry, and we think over the long haul they will probably retain that status.
AT&T, by the way, was paying back $600, right, to Apple for the iPhone. That was the subsidy. And Verizon's expected to only pay back $400 to Apple for the iPhone. Is that the case?
I believe that is the case.
So they get cheaper subsidies. And remember, at the beginning, AT&T was also sharing its revenues with Apple for the network revenues. And, of course, Verizon won't have to do that. Verizon gets kind of a sweeter deal here, don't they, Shaw?
The numbers I've heard are actually similar. I mean, of course, I don't cover AT&T, Verizon, but if you look at Apple's ASPs, they're about $640 in the last quarter, and then of which roughly about $200 or so is paid by the customer, and the balance is paid by the carrier. So the subsidies, I think, in terms of the corporate average, is somewhere in the $400 range. So I actually think this Verizon subsidy is actually similar to what they're getting overall.
Hey, guys, I want to bring another one of the telecom companies into it, and that is Sprint, which is sort of left at the altar, so to speak, or left out of the dance, or whatever bad cliche that I just used that you want to use.
Out of the dance, I think, is good.
Out of the dance.
They really weren't at the altar, were they?
No, and it's down the most today. It's down about 3.5%. David, at the same time, in comments today, Apple execs said that this agreement with Verizon is not exclusive. What does this mean for Sprint going forward? I mean, sort of short term and longer term.
Well, from Sprint's perspective, obviously this is something they would very much like to add to their customer, but at this point, it doesn't look like it's a near-term possibility. I think longer-term the possibility exists. And then one other point, if you will. I know we're obviously focusing today on the iPhone, and rightfully so, but I think with both AT&T and Verizon, it's also important to look at the valuation and the yields of the two stocks. AT&T is currently yielding 6.2%, making it the highest yielding stock in the Dow Jones Industrial Average. They've raised the dividend 27 consecutive years. And then Verizon is the second highest yielding stock with a 5.5% dividend yield. We think these stocks are still attractive for income-oriented investors looking for modest capital appreciation potential.
Hey, David, thanks so much for joining us. David Burks there from Hilliard Lyons and Shaw Wu from Kaufman Bros. Always appreciated.